So, welcome to our next episode of Sex in the News. I'm Dr. Jennifer Weeks, and I'm here with
Eli.
and we are here to talk today about actually something Eli wanted to bring to us. There's often plenty of things in the news to chat about, so he wanted to talk about this case that we've seen, and I am going to turn the reins over to him and let him run the show here.
Thanks. So I would say probably a month or two ago, just before the holidays, there has been a case that was proposed by I believe it's the same guy that filed charges against Diddy. I forget his the U.S. attorney for the South District of New York, Damian Williams,
Yep.
indicted the Alexander brothers for sex crimes and sex trafficking and sexual assault of multiple victims. And as far as I know, I've never heard of these guys before in my life.
Right.
They are real estate brokers from New York. They have established themselves in New York and in Florida. From what I've seen just two states,
And
and I
big money. Yeah, I did.
yeah,
I
making really big money, like millions of dollars worth of
high
sales,
end. I did a little.
real estate. Yep.
I did a little poking into it, and so the parents immigrated to the U.S. from Israel and are
Israel.
like self-made millionaire folks, really hardworking folks, and then the brothers have this real estate empire. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Yeah.
like the most, selling the most high-end properties in Manhattan and in Miami. So they're in that sort of power hierarchy of the New York business echelon. They're pretty high up there, and in Miami as well.
Yeah. And the brothers are Alon and Oren Alexander. Those
So
are
they
their names.
also indicted Brother Tal.
Yeah, and tall too. I was gonna get to. Oh yeah,
Oh, okay. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna
Yeah, I
get
was
to
gonna
that
say.
too because this is an interesting dynamic that they have here, right? Because Alon and Oren are the real estate guys. Tall is not cybersecurity, home security, because their family also has a security firm. And in one of the cases, one of the victims proposed that they were set up. She was set up to go visit them at some barbecue or one of their houses, and she couldn't. After the whole assault happened, she couldn't get out of the room. Now that to me sounds more like, okay, their family owns a security firm, a home security firm, right? Tall is probably the one that was able to provide that kind of security within the home as far as like knowing what doors
Like
to
what's going on.
lock and
Yeah.
everything like
It's I
that.
mean it was interesting, and I'm gonna, because again, we're part of what we're trying to do here is be educational. And so in our practice, right, like we don't really get a lot of folks who have been charged with sex trafficking, because I'm going to say this and I might be wrong, but in my experience, it's not something that they've been kind of able to kind of enforce or have been hot to enforce until recent history, right? Which is fantastic. But there's been a lot more, FBI and police presence around sex trafficking to try to, catch the folks that are doing this and harming these victims. So we just don't see it as much. I have a feeling, in my research for this, I have a feeling we're going to start to, because they're very much starting to, enforce this, which again is fantastic. So I'm just going to, for educational purposes, pull up like what the actual sex trafficking laws are. And this is the federal. Because when we say sex trafficking, like some people think that's just minors, or so
Right.
what is it? And I'm going to get academic. And so by definition, this is the federal law. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purposes of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform an act has not attained the age of 18. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because that's a lot more than, coercing women, getting them on a plane, telling them they're going to a party in LA and taking them overseas. And, that could also mean people that are going to, frequenting massage parlors, right? Where people are being human trafficked and sex trafficked to work in like the massage parlors or things like that. So it is actually a pretty broad definition, but basically anyone who's forced to do some kind of sex act that they do not wish to do. And that could be physical force or coercion.
Right. And the majority of what they were doing was pretty much luring these women to these homes or places, and then they were actually drugging them. Some of them, well, not all of them were drugged, but a lot of them were.
Were, right.
And a lot of them were. And there are a lot of accounts of, also, there's another gentleman that was recently charged. He was a friend of the brothers. His name is Ohad Fisherman.
Okay.
And he was present during one of the incidents where he actually held down one of the victims for the assault of the brothers. And
Okay, so
then
this is
after,
very serious physical force.
right, very serious physical force in which another person was complicit in the assault. And and there's a statement by one of the victims that said the victim said the brothers argued over who was going to rape her first, and she was held down by Fisherman and raped by the twins. Afterwards, she was forced to have sex with Fisherman, then told to take a shower and not to tell anyone about what happened, and she was allowed to leave. And that quote was taken from NBCMiami.com.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's more than just one person. It's more like these cases are starting to become, they're coming out like wildfire now ever since Diddy.
But yeah, and so if you look at the actual indictment, the U.S. DOJ indictment, it's just that it says dozens of women.
Yeah,
so
dozens, yeah.
Repeatedly, violently drug, sexually assault, and rape dozens of victims, arranging for travel, luxury experiences, and to be forcibly raped or assaulted by multiple men.
And these incidences have been occurring since, I think, like all the way back to 2012, 2016, something like that.
Right.
So the brothers have been doing this for years.
At least a decade. Yeah.
Yeah, at least a decade.
So I think I'm going to pose you a question, Eli, because again, our goal or our purpose is to kind of say, okay, how do we educate people from this? So how on earth, right? Like, do people, in your opinion, get to the point where they're like, sure, right? We can do this. It's no big deal to, lure these women in and forcibly rape and assault them. Like, what makes a person in their head think that that is okay?
I honestly,
and again, we don't know about them. This is just in general.
Yeah, I don't want to psychoanalyze them because I've never met them, never spoken to them in my life.
In general,
it's just like when you have, and particularly men, right? And not to say that women don't do this.
They do, just not as often.
It's just not as open. And I was just like, Cardi B. But when it comes to men, right? I feel like they get to when you reach a certain status, certain stratosphere, a lot of the things that you have done before you hit that wall just is so easily accessible that nothing really tickles your fancy anymore.
Okay.
Right? So when money is just as accessible and just as much as air, right? Mm-hmm. You can buy whatever you want. You can buy the houses that you want. You can buy the cars that you want. You have this wall of as far as insulated power, right? Where it's just like, okay, you have the money, you have the power. So now all that money and power is insulated. So then when you have people trying to get in and get access to you, you're just like, okay, well, if I'm going to have these women or people to have access to me, I want to also have access to them. Right. So it's just like, look at me. I am this person. I am worth this. I have this. Now, this person, this layman or this laywoman isn't really any person of worth of influence or power, and it has no kind of juice or clout whatsoever. But I want access to them in ways that not everybody can have.
Right. And so it comes down, and again, this is sort of in general, we have not met these gentlemen. A lot of times what is sexual abuse and sexual assault about? And it is very clearly a sexual crime, and there are sexual acts and sexual abuses that occur. It's very frequently about power and control, right? And so, like you said, if I've got money, status, all of these things, with that comes a sense frequently of entitlement, right? Because I have the clout, the money, the whatever, I feel entitled to just kind of take what I want, right? And to sort of abuse that power over people that, don't have that power, have less power than me. So like when I see these things, I think, part of it is really about this power and control, and that, I see myself as this person, right? I'm like big money, big shot, big whatever, and I'm entitled to just kind of do what I want. And other people's, I was going to say thoughts or feelings, but even humanity at some level becomes less important, right? Than what I think I'm allowed to do.
Right. And they are within that insulation, right? Because they've built that insulation over the years, right? And within that installation, they feel as though that they are protected by doing whatever they want. They are the exception of the rule to do whatever, do what other people, what layman people cannot do and get away with, just
Right.
because they have the clout, the money, the power, the influence. And that's why that's why people do this. That's why people get involved with drugging people. And I mean, to me, that's not. It's nothing but cowardice to me, because I'm just like, look, man, like if you have all this power and influence and you're gonna do something like this, like you have to drug a person, or you leverage your power in order to get them to do things, to manipulate people to do things. That's not power. Like that's just cowardice.
And I mean, I imagine, as I was sort of thinking through this, like there's got to be something else going on, right? Because you're right. If I've got money, power, and influence, there's probably people in the world that will have sex with me, right? That
Absolutely.
I do not have to drug, and I do not have to, forcibly rape. So there's something else, right, that we're getting. They're
Oh yeah,
getting, whoever's
there's
doing
something
this
else.
is getting, out of the fact that, like, the person doesn't know that they're, drugging them, and being able to do things to them that they're unconscious or unaware of, right? Because so that for me like exceeds just the power and control, because why do we have to drug them, right? Like, what's that about as well?
So, and just thinking about this too, like I do think that when it comes with drugging them, right, that
Hmm.
that would in theory make them less of a credible person to listen to, I guess,
Hmm.
because there's drugs in their system, right? Or they're in theory they're not going to remember what happened, so I can still do this,
Get
and then
away
they
with
won't
it.
remember I did this and get away, because I'll get away with it because they won't remember.
Or they
They
have a
won't know
hazy
they
memory that I can gaslight them to be like, oh, no, no, you're like,
never
or
happened. Like, what
right,
are you
or
talking?
you were totally a willing participant and gaslight the hell out of the victim.
Right, because again, you already know that you drugged them, so then you're trying to persuade them to believe that whatever you're saying is true because you were the one who wasn't drugged. So there's that power dynamic too of just like, I'm the one who wasn't drugged, I was sober, stable, etc. I am the one that needs to be listened to. You were drugged, you were irresponsible,
Right.
therefore,
And we can sort
whatever.
of defame the victim, right? Which is
Yeah,
what a defense attorney would do if it goes
which,
well, right? That's their job.
which is exactly what a defense attorney is going to do.
Yeah. I mean, and it's sort of, like, to look at this power dynamic too. Like, some people might be like, well, if they've been doing this for 10 years, let's just say it's probably more.
Yeah,
Why did no victims come forward before? Like, why, they're doing these horrible things. They're coercing women. They're forcibly raping women. Why don't the victims come forward? And I think that goes back to that power and control, right?
yeah.
Like,
And it's sad. Like because once you have, because there's that shame and embarrassment too of like, okay, if I was drugged, right? If I'm putting myself in the victim's shoes, right? I know I was drugged, but I just don't. But whatever happened was still so fuzzy to me. I'm not going to. I don't want to go through the embarrassment of someone machine gunning questions at me when I was drugged to be like, oh, so what happened next? What happened there? What happened here? What happened here?
mhm.
What did he say there? Where did he touch you? So it's kind of like there's
Because
that.
even the victim interview is just a horribly traumatic thing for
Oh,
victims who go through this. I mean, done by
yeah,
an advocate for all the right reasons. It's just very traumatic for a victim of sexual assault to go through.
absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
because you're just again just the fact just going through the process of being questioned in your head. You're just like no one's going. You're going talking to yourself in your head at the same time. You're being questioned, saying no one's going to believe me because I can't answer all these questions in a way that's acceptable. Or I'm
Yeah.
not saying not giving details quick enough or what have
Or
you.
what level of detail might be needed to
Level of detail,
actually
yeah.
make an indictment. And so, I mean, I think the other piece of that, when we look at, somebody who might say, well, I think the dad, I don't know if it's the dad, but someone on their side is saying, well, all of these women are just trying to profiteer from their money. The article I read was like, they're like 40 of them are trying to profiteer from money. But, there's a piece of that. Again, we can victim blame, and sometimes victims blame themselves, even if it's not their fault, right? That,
Because
if,
they
if,
feel like they
if,
put themselves in that position. So
right.
it's
If I agreed to go to this party, or I went to, I knew I was going to go to an event with one of these people, again, a victim's brain can distort that to be like, well, this is my fault because I agreed to get on the plane. They told me we were going to Miami, but we actually went somewhere else, right? They lied. They forced them to do these things. But again, victims' brains sometimes, because of that shame can blame themselves when it's really not their fault. And then when it's a big case like this in the media, what is, the defense or people, some people will sort of blame the victims and be like, well, why did you go to a party with these people?
Yeah.
Which is just crap, right? Like,
Yeah.
if they agreed to go to a party, they agreed to go to a party.
Right, and
Full stop.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like they agreed to go to a party or they agreed to go to someone's house. It's the same. It's the same thing with Bill Cosby, right? Where it's just like, okay, why did you go to Bill Cosby's hotel room at 11 o'clock at night, or why did you go to Mike Tyson's room at 11 o'clock at night, or who, insert famous figure
Person,
here.
right?
Yeah, it's just like, okay, well, why did you go there at 11 o'clock at night? You knew what it was, kind of a thing. You knew if someone's asking you to come to someone's apartment or someone's house at 11 o'clock at night.
There's an implied assumption that there's going to be something sexual, even though, again, like we're talking about consent, that's crap. It's just crap, right? It's just crap.
It's just like, to me, I'm just like, okay, but like, even if it's implied, right? Both parties still have the ability and the wherewithal, obviously, unless they're drugged or anything like that, right? To say no. And if the person who's asking for sex is not accepting the word no, because no is a full sentence.
Yep.
And they coerce them, drug them after the fact, or completely assault them, then they need to be put in jail.
They're held accountable. And I'm going to kind of piggyback on that, because when we are teaching about consent, or we're doing treatment for our guys, we'll often talk about compliance, coercion, and consent, right? Consent being the, yes, I agree to act A with you, right? Full yes, not even like no means no, but yes means yes. But compliance and coercion, in my mind and how we teach that, are not consensual either, right? So what's coercion, right? Like, this is some of this, right? Gifts, or I always kind of talk about like, oh, well, baby, if you loved me, you'd do this, right? So like emotional coercion. And so you're kind of maybe guilted or manipulated into a sexual act. Mm-hmm. That's not actually consent, right? Because you're not, without that guilt or manipulation, you're not like, hell yeah, I want to do this. And the other piece we talk about is compliance, right? And not necessarily in this context, but, even in a relationship, if my partner wants to do something and I don't really want to do it at all, but I fear, right? Or I worry, oh, is he or she going to be mad? Are we going to end the relationship? Or, things like that. I might comply with that sexual request, even though I don't really want to do it. And again, it's a little different than the coercion, but it's the fear of kind of losing the relationship. And I think of an example years ago, worked with a woman, and her husband wanted an open relationship, right? And so to bring extra partners into the relationship, and this was years and years ago, before we were really even talking about consensual non-monogamy and polyamory and things like that. But she didn't want to do it, right? She had no desire to engage in these things, to bring other men and women into their bedroom, but she did it because she truly felt that if she didn't, her husband was going to divorce her, right? And so again, there's a whole lot that goes into that, but that's not truly consensual, right? So again, you go to person A's bedroom at 11 o'clock at night, there's no implied assumption, right? We still have to get consent. Sorry, that's my
No, you're good.
my tirade about compliance, coercion, and consent.
No, so you're absolutely right. And I mean, I think a lot of people lose sight of that, because it's just, and I feel like most people don't want to do the mental work anymore to really, ever, probably, obviously.
Right. I don't know that they ever did.
Yeah. That's why I was just like, oh, let me back up and say ever. Because it's almost as if, like, once you close that door at 11 o'clock, 11:15, 11:30, all bets are off, kind of a thing. It's just like, no. Like that if I go, like, I mean, obviously we're not, they're like, it's so frustrating to me, because I'm just like, people have to be held accountable for things that, even though they could be under the guise that they're coming to someone's apartment for a different reason, even if it is sex, let's just say. Mm-hmm. And then the victim that comes in, obviously doesn't want to go through with anything. It's just like, you feel like you're entitled because you want to save, you don't want to deal with the rejection.
Right. Or you just, you started, and it's like the little consent video we use to teach, right? And it's, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a great little teaching video for consent. We use a lot of times with adolescents, and even in some of our adult groups. And they kind of say tea is clearly the metaphor for sex. And they're like, and if someone starts to drink the tea and they don't want the tea anymore, you don't make them drink it, right? So even if we've started some kind of sexual interaction, you or I can say, I'm done. at any
Right.
point, right?
And
And
it's like don't continue to make them drink the tea. Don't make them feel bad for not drinking
not
it
wanting the
anymore
tea.
or not wanting the tea. So it's just like because I'm like because in theory you're getting into the coercion and the manipulation and the guilt tripping.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
And
I mean, it goes back to, and we have a little digressed from the sex trafficking, but that's okay. But, you know, and you work a lot more with the younger folks than I do, but even when we have them in group, without to get on the tangent of how horrible a lot of American sex education is, like a lot of those folks come in not really understanding what consent is, right?
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
she didn't say no. Okay. But did you have a discussion, right, about what everybody liked, what everybody was okay with, like, you know, things like that. And so I think a lot of our failing, perhaps as a culture,
right.
is not actually really teaching what consent is. And I know it's moved from like it used to be years ago, no means no, to yes means yes, but I think it's so much more nuanced than yes means yes. Yes to what, right? Like what am I agreeing to? And that's why I always kind of say that, you know, some of the best teachers of consent are in the kink community, right?
Yeah,
Because they
they do
talk
not
about
play.
everything that's going on and what's okay and what's not okay and what can be negotiated and what can't be negotiated. And I mean, they have more, if it's done sort of well, they have more discussions about consent and what sexual acts are going to go on than perhaps someone who's been married to their partner for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And,
all right,
and
I'm
it's
done hyping
no,
all
you're
that.
no, you're fine. There and to go off of that too. I mean, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but this just a memory of this came into my head right now. We're talking about the kink community being better at consent, establishing consent. There was a skit on the Chappelle Show where Dave and this woman were like Dave was just dressed in like this robe, like this Hugh Hefner-esque robe in front of the fireplace, invited this woman over to have sex, right? And next thing you know, he whips out this like book of all these papers and the sign before they have sex. And essentially, yeah, if like it's starting to get to that point where yeah, we got to take it that serious. It's starting to get that to take it that serious because it's just like it's not it's a metaphor obviously. Like no one's
Right.
going to sit there and sign.
And it's Chappelle. So, I mean,
Yeah,
some people do.
but it's just like as far as having that verbal
Mhm.
conversation of like what's going to happen, what do you like, what do I like, et cetera, right? All of that needs to happen
Yep.
before you guys do the
Before
deed.
I frequently say that the people that we talk about having like talk about sex with the least are the people we're actually having sex with.
Right.
Like we're just not talking to them about that. But you know, and so again, we kind of went down that bunny trail. So I'm going to bring us back a little bit. And given that sort of definition of sex trafficking, I mean, I think it's interesting. I go back to, and I'm not good at names, but the football guy who was arrested at the massage parlor, like a football coach or
Oh,
owner,
no.
Bill, I don't know.
Oh,
Anyway,
Sean.
but like I think we're probably, because they're starting to take things more seriously again, which is good, right? I think some of those arrests, right? Like if your solicitation arrests might also end up being sex trafficking arrests because many of those women, right, are not there voluntarily. They're brought to the United
They're
States
still
under false pretenses, and then they end up
yeah.
kind of very much forced to work in these positions. So, you know, and I think we have a newer case at our program, and I'm not going to give any details about it, obviously, but I think it's the first time that we've seen sex trafficking attached to charges, right, that are not as dramatic as like these brothers that are, you know, drug sort of basically kind of kidnapping women, flying them, drugging them, and forcibly raping them. But because of that definition, the legal definition of sex trafficking, it's a bit of an add-on, I would say, to
Yeah.
some of the other cases.
Yeah, I think it's gonna lead at least a little more towards conspiracy to conspiracy of sex trafficking charge. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna start seeing that a lot more now since we have this year or the end of the year, give or take. But
Yeah, we got it. And I mean, I remember I was looking at the case. I was like, "Oh, sex trafficking charges," because
yeah,
I didn't know the
right,
definition of the law, right? And looking at what little bit I knew about this new client's case, it surprised me. But now, kind of digging into what the actual definition, right, the legal definition of sex trafficking is, it makes sense, right? It
yeah,
makes sense, right? Like it's what folks are doing. You know, again, if I'm going to a massage parlor, or I'm, you know, paying for sex with someone who is human trafficked and sex trafficked here that is participating in sex trafficking. And I think in my brain, until I dug into it, I was more thinking like the only way you could be charged with sex trafficking is if you are the person, right? Who's like bringing the person in from overseas, or like with the Diddy case, right? Like you're, forcing these women into these sex acts, but not the participant, right?
Yeah.
Which, and again, I know you don't like to bring up Diddy quite so much because that's so played out, but
it's fine. I'm fine with talking about it. I'm just like,
but literally what that just popped into my head is, right, like, okay, so he's got these charges for the sex trafficking as the guy who was kind of responsible.
Yeah, orchestrating it, yeah.
But based on that definition, everyone who had sex with one of those women who was sex trafficked could be charged with the federal sex trafficking.
Right.
Because it's not just you're doing it, it's you're engaging in, in acts with someone who was sex trafficked.
Right, and your ignorance of that doesn't matter.
Ignorance of the law is not a defense, right?
Yeah,
which means those guest lists are, I think people might be worried, as they should be, right?
And I want to say one more. The only one thing I want to say about this case is that, remember how Jay-Z was dragged into it as well?
Yes.
There was recent news that came out that they were trying to get the name of the victim disclosed, and the judge is denied it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, surprisingly, but also I see where they're coming from, but at the same time, I'm like, a lot of people are kind of just like, well, look, if you're trying to make a very serious allegation as far as rape is concerned, assault, your name should be disclosed, because that is a serious allegation to make a claim, like whether it's an influential perpetrator or not, the names need to be released.
So the other side of that, which is clearly why we don't release it most of the time, right, is that
harassment.
Well, I mean, yeah, we live in a world where, again, victims don't come forward anyway, right? And so if I come forward and I make an accusation against someone who's an international superstar, I am going to get death threats. I'm probably going to be doxxed. I'm probably going to have to go into hiding. If I have kids, I'm going to have to quit my job. I'm going to have to do all of that, because we live in a world that if that person's name comes out, they're going to get attacked. Right? By the people who are, even like in this case we originally were talking about, oh, well, you're just out for money, you're out for this, you're out for that, right? Like they're going to get attacked. And those kinds of social media statements, I would say, are going to be like the polite ones versus, other things that victims can get harassed with, and which is why you don't do it now. Like, in a closed hearing, in a closed case, right? Like when it's in court, that victim's name obviously will come out, but that stuff gets sealed, which I think, going back to the first piece we talked about, the French case, right, with Pellico. Okay, so say that again. Pellico, sorry, so I don't mispronounce that again. Why that was so groundbreaking is that she said, no, I'm not going to hide, right? Yeah. You're gonna say my name. I'm fine with that. Not that she was fine with it, but she did it, I think, for the greater good. Yeah. And you're also going to have to look at the videos, right? Because again, most cases, any of that evidence is not done in public, right? Right. So in, like we do a lot of cases with people who have possession of child sexual abuse materials, right? They don't show, or they did back in the day, but they don't show those images in court anymore. And they don't like put pictures of it in the discovery. They'll put the description of it, because it's heinous stuff and people, don't want to see that. But again, so it's more things that we do to kind of keep victims from coming forward.
Yeah, being further victimized.
And further victimize them. So if you kind of get brave enough to do it and you do it publicly, you are literally putting yourself out in this kind of situation, particularly for attack. Yeah,
and you gotta, and unfortunately, you have to. That's the way. That's the risk of it, right? That's the risk.
I think that even goes back to the power and control, and so like if that happens on a just an average Bob Smith kind of case, right? There's even potential for harassment of the victim, right? Facebook harassment or family harassment or things like that. But the power and control piece, when we're doing this with either famous or rich, powerful people, right, is that they've got those networks of people and they've got the money and the power that they're sort of automatically assumed. And because they have that money and power, there's this assumption by a lot of people that, oh, the victim just wants money, right?
Yeah. A lot of the assumption is just that the victim wants money. And I remember when... give me a second. Oh, God. What is her name? I don't know why her name is escaping me. the woman, the R&B artist that started this whole thing with P Diddy, Cassie. So when Cassie first released everything and made her allegations against Diddy, there was a former rapper. Well, I mean, he still would be considered a rapper. His name was Slim Thug, based out of Houston, Texas, and he made a claim about Cassie pretty much with that. It's just like, oh, y'all just trying to get a check. Y'all just trying to get a check. And then after everything happened and the videos got released, Diddy physically assaulting her and everything like that. And Slim Thug, retracted his statement and apologized, formally apologized.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah, but it's just that, there it is, where it's just like, okay, for those people that are running around saying, oh, this everybody, all these victims just want to check, like when it's like 40 plus people, there's just, they all want to check, but it's just like, you like, again, from the outside looking in, it's like there are things about these allegations and these cases that we don't know as regular citizens. So it's just like you can't just generalize all these victims to just say that they're
Oh,
just
you all want money.
like you all want money, when it's just like, no.
And I think what feeds that sometimes, right, is that case particularly, because New York changed their laws, right? Because there's a statute of limitations, right? And every state is different, so you can't press criminal charges against someone for a historical abuse of you or historical thing after whatever X number of years. But when New York changed that law, it allowed civil, right? So they still couldn't press like criminal charges after a period of time, but it allowed them to, I think it totally got rid of the civil statute of limitations for a period of time. And don't quote me, I'm not a lawyer. So that allowed people like Cassie to come forward, right? And say, hey, this happened. But the only means she had to do that was a civil suit, right? She could not at that point
sue criminally,
make a legal claim because it had passed the statute of limitations for that. And so I think when these people start coming with civil suits, it feeds that narrative that, oh, they just want money, when maybe that is actually the only
option they have,
possibility to get accountability based on the law and the statute of limitations.
Right. There's that too. And a lot of people, again, like not everybody is not going to know that. So they're just going to go off of whatever emotional reaction that they have in the moment without actually looking into it first. Just like, okay, why is it being handled this way and not
right
the other?
Well, we like to make assumptions and spout off on social media before we do any research and data collection.
And it's
right?
just like, you would think that, when it comes to the lawyers doing their due diligence before they file a formal complaint, that there's actually evidence of what the allegations are for them, instead of just saying, oh, you want to check? Okay, cool. We can go file this affidavit against this person.
And with the legal ones, so like with these Alexander brothers, right? These are grand jury indictments, right? So this is not just the federal prosecutor saying, hey, I'm charging you with this. They have to bring that in front of a grand jury, which is a jury it's just like a regular jury, like a criminal trial, but they're not deciding guilt or innocence. They're deciding if there's enough evidence to put forth an actual criminal charge. So it's a grand jury, right? It's a jury of your peers saying that we see enough evidence to charge you with these sex trafficking laws.
Right.
And so again, people because people just are ignorant of the law, right? Like it's not, unless you're an attorney or you work in the legal system, you're not going to know these things. And, particularly in a big federal case, a federal prosecutor can't just be like, charge you with, whatever. They have laws and rules and regulations, and they have to have enough evidence to bring that to a grand jury to get an indictment and to move forward.
Yeah. And, I think that really to kind of put this also into another perspective too, is just like with Alan. I think that Alan, when he was formally charged, he was getting ready to have his first baby, daughter. I think it was going to be a girl, if I'm not mistaken. To think about you doing these things to another man's daughter, all these people's daughters, it's just like, okay, well, how are you going to be treating your own daughter? How does that kind of reframe how your behavior has been? Because, they do say this, that when you have kids, it's supposed to make you better, or kind of, make you actually kind of...
we hope. It makes you think about things.
We would hope, right? We would hope that when you have kids, or getting ready to have kids, that is going to make you better, get you to kind of like have more, not more than a little, but some more insight about your behaviors moving forward. And I do wonder Like if he stopped to think about that for a little bit.
Right,
But
because I believe didn't his wife have the baby like while this was all going
yeah,
on?
yeah. I
Yeah.
think while it was going on, and then another, I think it was the other guy, Ohad, was on his honeymoon in Tokyo. I think when he got his charges. So there's a lot of these like regular day to day life things that they're going through, and then to be like slapped with all these charges because it's just like this karma for you.
It's
Like
and it's always interesting, and and again we talk a lot more about the kind of educating around the perpetrating and things, but a moment for the secondary victims, right? That there was just a bail hearing. One of them was denied bail because even with like $115 million bail or something, he was deemed a flight risk, which I get,
yeah,
right? Like you
yeah,
own jets, you can probably be
obviously.
like wasn't. Again, I'm bringing up your boy Diddy. Like he was getting ready to hop on
Yeah,
something in Miami. That in that courtroom, mom and dad are there, and the wives are there, right? And so while we absolutely have, women who've been horribly victimized in this case, we have secondary victims, right? I'm going to make an assumption, totally an assumption, don't know the ladies, that their wives probably didn't know what they were doing,
absolutely.
right?
Now I'm making an assumption here as well. But when you're making that kind of money, you're at home living like in a whole nother world. Everything is being taken care of for you. Life is amazing.
And you're probably not thinking that your husband is sex trafficking women and forcibly raping them.
That's one of the last things on earth that you're thinking that your husband is flying around New York and Florida to do. You think
Doing
he's
all
just
this.
trying to
So, yeah.
continue to secure an everlasting future for you and your family,
And
but
your
he's over
family
here.
and in love or all of those things. So I mean I want to take a moment to just say like this, and we talk about this with the folks that we work with, right, who've
Right,
committed
right,
sex crimes, is that if you have victims of the actual sex crime, but you also have other victims, right, that if your wife is pissed off at you, well, yeah, right,
mhm,
she didn't sign up to marry someone who's going to end up a registered sex offender. She didn't sign up to have her name and her picture plastered all over national or international news, right? And the mom, the dad, none of them signed up for this, right? So they are, what we would call sort of a secondary victim that, this is also affecting them as well.
And also too, like when it comes to unborn children or even born children,
Yep.
right? It's gonna be like they are also going to be looked at sideways. They're probably going to be subjected to bullying as well.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, again, everything is on the internet, and we've had that,
Right.
happen with our clients who have children, right? The sex offender registry is public, right? So
Right.
we've had folks who, have grade school children who are getting bullied and name called because their parent is on the sex offender registry. And I don't have any kind words for that. Like that child has done nothing, right? Like
Right.
that child is completely innocent in all of this. And for people to do that really
It's upsetting.
I don't have a better word. It really pisses me off that we're gonna, bully a child for something that their parent did.
Yeah, because it's like, what is it? The sins of the father, right? We're keeping that alive, right? Where it's just like the kids have to pay for the sins of the father.
The sins of the father or the mother, but in our
Yeah,
case, it's mostly dad's.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to say, any other thoughts, comments, anything you want to kind of talk about with this Alexander Brothers sex trafficking case that took us on quite a few little good tangents, but bunny trails.
I mean, I honestly just think that there needs to be. I think what not only is it a psychopathy issue, I also think that it's also like somewhat of a money issue.
That entitlement, that
That
power.
entitlement of what money brings, but it's just like you can't just have a like. There's been arguments for having a cap for how
Hmm.
much money a person should be able to earn. And to a point, I agree with that because with that comes a lot of entitlement. But it's just like again, you don't want to just with that assertion comes a generalization that all people who make an exorbitant amount of money are going to be doing these illegal things.
Doing bad things. And they're not. I mean, there's some people
They're
that
not.
make tons of money and do great, wonderful charitable things.
Right, but it's just like on the flip side, right? You can also within that, that installation, it's
Hmm.
just like, okay, well, what do we know, or what don't we know that they may have been doing that's been illegal that
Right. And
we just
it's
don't know?
and again, this is where sort of my evaluation brain goes like, what's the underlying thing,
Right.
upbringing, personality, characteristic, whatever, that, makes some people go in one direction where they're going to abuse their money and their
Abuse
power
money.
in whatever
Right.
capacity. And what makes other people be like, okay, with this great power and money comes great responsibility, right? Like, what's that underlying piece that makes someone diverge? And there's probably research somewhere, but that's not my thing, and I have no idea what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta look into it for it because I'm also curious to find out like what okay like it can't be just money that corrupts people into abusing because there are plenty of people who don't have that kind of
We
money
don't hear
that,
about Warren Buffett doing anything inappropriate.
right, we don't hear anything about Warren Buffett. I mean, where does he live in Iowa, whatever the fuck, Bumblefuck, Iowa, whatever,
Somewhere in the Midwest.
or Nebraska or something. And he has access to so much money, more money than God, as people would say, right? And I mean, he's not doing anything.
Right.
He's chilling.
Yep. So there's got to be a difference somewhere. So
Yes, yeah. So it's just kind of like for me, I'm just like this is what is going to hopefully keep these people who are wealthy, have power, have influence, kind of in check. Where it's just like you need to really be a little more careful about how you move and how you go about doing these things with
and what you're doing.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and one
Not to get
aspect.
away with anything. Sorry.
Right.
Not
No,
to
but
get
and
away
I
with-
said like one aspect of sentencing, and I've sat and listened to many of them. Right, is that when a judge, particularly a federal judge, makes their decision on a sentence, they talk about one of the things that they particularly have to take into account is the deterrence factor, right? Like they need to make a sentence on the person in front of them that in part will be a deterrence to others, right? And so there's not a consensus as to that its effectiveness, but in a case like this, I think when you've got groundbreaking, big public cases, right? Like big famous people, big rich powerful people, I think there's probably will be a deterrence effect, or maybe there's some other famous rich powerful people in the world that are kind of going, oh shit, right? Maybe I should rethink my behavior, which even without this, they really should. But, I think when we've got these big cases and now that they're starting to actually charge in this way, which comes with really high, sentences, that one hopes that it will become a deterrent and help people who maybe have a predilection to abuse their power and money to make better choices.
Yeah, and it also and on the flip side, it empowers the victims.
Yes.
To come forward, and that's also a good thing because without the victims holding these people
accountable,
they'll continue to do what they're doing to other people. They'll be continuously be victims if the victims don't show up or don't speak up.
What does Brene Brown say in a very different fashion? But she says, speak truth to power. I know it's in a different context, but it applies here, right? Like we need to victims, and there's so many reasons why they don't, but maybe we need to create a world where it's easier for them to come forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's just like, okay, I mean, they're like witness protection and all that stuff like that, WITSEC. But I mean, how effective is it? How really protective is it? Especially nowadays.
And, and once something's on the internet, it's never off. And social media has enabled the troll faction to be wretched and show the worst pieces of humanity against a lot of people, but also victims of assault. So, I mean, and that's a much bigger societal conversation than I'm willing to tackle.
Right. Yeah, so. It's just, I don't know. I just think that it's just, we need to, because there are people that make false allegations as well, but I just think that we need to comb through that in order to pick out the people who are making false allegations.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do.
And while that does happen, right, the percentage of people that make false allegations versus those whose allegations are very real is small.
It is very low. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very
percentage
small.
of that is very low. So I mean, but it's not to say that it doesn't happen.
It does, but again, it's navigating, believing victims and advocating for victims, but also seeking truth through investigation.
Yeah, and that's the only lawyers just need to do their due diligence and make sure that they go about it the right way and just be like, hey, like we can't take this case because there's lack of evidence or there's conflicting evidence.
Which is again there's more bunny trails, but why a lot of those cases on a smaller scale don't go right to indictment or to charges because of lack of evidence. But so I'm going to wrap us up today because we've been almost an hour. So
I didn't even realize what time it was.
It goes, and this is also like what Eli and I do in the office too. And then we're like, oh shit, we have an appointment coming in.
Yeah, this is what literally.
But
happened.
So it's again the Alexander brothers who are currently sitting in federal detention centers, denied bail because they have been indicted on a pretty massive scale of sex trafficking, and that involves really drugging and violently raping women, which sent us down a bunny trail of talking about consent and victim empathy and a whole power and control, which is really what a lot of this is about. So until
Yeah.
next time.
And please, people, also for listeners out there, don't forget to subscribe, put some comments in, get some engagement. Let's go. If you guys
And
have questions or anything that you want us to answer, maybe
we're happy to do so.
yeah, more comment, more topics that you guys want to talk about. Do you guys want us to talk about the Lily Phillips issue? Do you guys want us to talk about maybe the new Fox News issue? Let us
Lots
know
of
what you
stuff out
guys want
there.
us to talk about too. You guys are part of this as well, this discussion. So
And what just popped into my head, which I will absolutely put in the comments when we post this, are all of the hotlines, right, for reporting sexual abuse or child sexual abuse. Because again, our main goal for this is to educate people both about offending and things like that. But also, if we empower one person who's been sexually assaulted to report that, that would make a lot of things worth it.
yeah, and also if you see something, even
Report it.
if you see something, report it. Whether it's online, in person, whatever, report it.
Report it. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks.